Hi, welcome to some ideas for using 2.5-inch strips in patchwork and other little projects. So we're doing 20 different ideas and we're running through them one a day at the moment, and we are up to idea number 6. How amazing is that? So what we're making this time is a little envelope type pouch. So we've got it so that it comes all the way down the back and up the front and all over the place, and a nice lining fabric. And there is a little bit of batting in there. We've got a fastener on there. So I think that's kind of fun. There's lots of reasons why you might need a pouch. Sometimes you might need to store your tablet in it. Sometimes you might need to just store chocolate in it. All sorts of reasons. I mean, there's the two main reasons in life, hey? So I'll just get started on showing you how to do it. If you've already signed up to receive the pattern from GourmetQuilter.com, you'll have a pattern with some information. So I'm just here to show you how to do it. So I'll go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do is make this strip down the center first. I've already started, but I'll show you in the segment. So it's done in small blocks. So we're just starting off with our center square, and then we've had 2 squares the same size, I must say, that we have cut in half diagonally. And so what we need to do now is pop these onto this square. So the best way to do this is probably so that we get them centered, do a little bit of a finger press in the square and lay this piece over the top so that the raw edges are even, and you should have an even amount of point out each side, but also the point should sit on that fold so then you know it's in the middle. And then we're just going to machine these on. So it's the best way I've found to do this is to do opposite sides first. So we'll do this side, and I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam, but it's just a scant 1/4 inch. That means just a whisker under 1/4 inch, not like a 1/8 inch, a whisker under 1/4 inch. And that's because it's quite tight for getting it to the size we want, and I thought it was better to take a very slightly under seam rather than oversized seam to be able to achieve that. So that's one side on, and now we need to put the other side on. So we're just wanting to do exactly the same thing. We can flip that out. We can see that our point is on the fold, that finger, well, I can see it, on that finger press fold. And the same thing, back to the sewing machine and stitch that one on. So the only place I'm using this little scant 1/4 inch seam is on this particular block. The rest of the project is all made using a full 1/4 inch seam. So now we just want to press those two. And part of the problem is that we're working with fabric which kind of moves. It's got a little mind of its own, fabric, and it doesn't always sit exactly as we think it's going to. And so the sizing becomes a little bit of an issue sometimes. So we've got those two on, which is great. So now we need our finger press line in the other direction so that we can pop these bits on the other 2 sides. So the same thing, pop that in the center, make sure your point's coming down into that center fold there, and stitch them on. So and I'll just pop the other one on because we need it. That out the way, center it, make sure that that point is sitting centrally there. And things are looking good. I hope you're enjoying this series. I'm enjoying them. They're having a lot of fun with these strips. So now I'm just going to press those 2 out as well. And so what we've now got is a square with funny little rabbit ears in the middle of the sides. So we're just going to trim it up. So it'll only be a little trim. And I've got a little square ruler here which helps quite a lot with this. Things just get a little bit wonky. So we just want to make sure that things are sitting within the size, and things always look a little bit more wonky than they should when we go to do this. It's only a tiny bit to trim off, but it's important, and it will help everything else go together much better if we do this trimming. So you want to make sure things are centered nicely. I've got a nice diagonal lines and things on this little square ruler. Most little square rulers have those sorts of markings. You want to make sure you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance beyond the point, all round and things like that. The pattern tells you all about sizes again. So that's really just trimming off some little raggy bits, but it's important. Now we need to join these together into the full column, because that's how we make it all in one piece. So I've already gone ahead and I've joined some. I just need to add those two on, and then I've already joined down the sides. There's two other strips, so I've already joined my strips ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead now and add those two to the center, and then add these to that, so that I've got one nice big piece, and then I will come back and show you what to do next. So I've gone ahead and I've joined all my front up, and I've actually layered it on top of the batting and the fabric I'm using for the lining. Now I've just mentioned a couple of things at the moment. The lining I've found when I've made this one, I've just used a colour that's something similar to the outside. It doesn't have to be the same, it doesn't even have to be similar, but the way we're constructing it, you might see the bits on the edge. So if you did a really strong contrast, you might see that and then not be happy. If you use something that's sort of similar, it'll just blend in. So this is different on the inside, but you don't really notice it there, and that's how it works in the way we're constructing this. So the other thing I didn't mention before was when I join together these pieces, we want to press these seams open because of the bulk at the corners, and then they just sit a little bit nicer. So what I've now done is I've layered my lining, the batting, and it's just a thin batting, and I'm using, I think it's actually a bamboo batting, this one. It was a piece I found in my little stash, and it's lovely because everything grips to it really nicely. I'm just going to trim everything up now. So I've got the other thing also is I've been just a little bit sneaky with the fabric length, because half a width of fabric, which we normally allow for being about 42 inches wide, we really just need it to be 43, and most fabrics are. So I've kind of counted on that and used half a width of fabric for these strips and for the lining as well. So just keep a little bit of an eye. That's a fairly tight size, but it should fit if you cut your fabric strips and lining piece in half. So I'm just going to trim this up, all three layers, but I'm trimming to the front, but it helps to have everything sitting together, because we're going to be basically, if you know the term, bagging it out. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be bringing the backing on top very shortly, or the lining, but it helps a lot to get everything done if everything's cut to the same size first, because we're going to be turning it out before we do any quilting this time. And rather than try and cut everything exactly the same size, I found it was much easier to lay this on top and then cut. So we've done all that, and I'm going to take the lining fabric now away from there and put it right sides together with the front, the outside, and everything should be the same size. Could pop a couple of clips or pins in if you'd like to hold that together. And then we just want to cut the little bit of shaping for the flap here, so that in the pattern you'll find that there's a shape for you to use with that. And so it's only half the width, nothing larger would fit on the page, so I thought we could either fold the fabrics and cut it together, or we can just do one side at a time. And I'm actually just going to cut that with my rotary cutter. You could draw it and then cut with some scissors if you would be more comfortable doing that. And I'm going to cut this side as well, so just turn your page over, and it just gives us that nice shape, so when we stitch around everything's ready for us just to sew. So that's that done. So all we need to do now is stitch all the way around with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we need to leave a gap of say 3 or 4 inches somewhere towards this end on one of the sides would be really good. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to turn it over to stitch it, I think. Leave my gap. I'm going to start stitching just a 1/4 inch seam all the way around, and then we just need to clip the little corners so that everything will turn out nicely, and turn it out the right way and press it. So I'll come back when I've got to that stage so I can show you what to do next. So I went all the way around my outside edge. I've turned it out through the gap there. and I've given it a nice press. I clipped my little corners so that we get a reasonable corner there, and I've got everything looking quite nice and flat and smooth. My edges are looking pretty good. Just so when you press it, just keep an eye on those edges because they're what we're going to see. And when you do have this little gap, just fold everything in that sort of 1/4 inch that you would have sewn it if you'd continued with the seam, so that everything's sitting nice and straight here on both sides. And the only other thing I've done is I've gone ahead and I've done a line of stitching right across that straight end, so not on the curved end but on the straight, just about 1/4 inch in from the edge. And I'm going to do some more quilting now. I'm going to just stitch just down on the 2 strips. I don't think it needs any more than that in the way of quilting. If you want to do more, of course, that's up to you, but that's what I've done here. I've just done a line 1/8 of an inch away here and here on both sides. So I thought I'd go ahead and do that now, and then I'll show you the next little bit. So I've gone ahead and got very carried away and have done all sorts of things. So I did my stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the 2 seam lines on both sides, and I started and stopped 1/4 of an inch from each end. So I'd already done this line 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, so I was able to start there, but I had stopped because we're going to be coming around there with another line of stitching. The other thing I got carried away with was putting the fastening on, so I've put the fluffy side on the flap, and that's because when you're pushing things in and out, you don't want something that's going to catch maybe on a sleeve or other things or scratches your hands. And so if it's just comfortably out here, it doesn't get us in the way as much. So it's all looking pretty good. We've got our lines of quilting up there holding everything nicely. To position this piece here, I just folded it where it's going to be folded, so we're going to be folding it on that join across there, and we're going to be folding the flap down on the join there, so that when this sits down, it just joins in with the pattern there. And so to position, it was easy. I did this one first, so I know where I want that one to go. And so if I position this where I want it and then flip that back, it's all lined up ready for me to position that and then sew that in place, and I know it'll be in the right place. So that was pretty straightforward. So I think we've pretty much done everything. I've still got my gap, which is not closed over yet, but that will get closed over in the next stitching, which is pretty much all we have to do now. So now we do need to fold it up on that line there. Make sure all our edges are sitting nicely together, because we're just doing a top stitch to hold it all together. We don't need to close it. In fact, we don't want to close it. I'm actually going to sew from this side because we're coming around here as a top stitching, and I would rather do that on the right side of the flap than not. So everything's looking pretty good. So we're just going to sew up all the way up here through all these layers, so make sure those edges are sitting together nicely, and with just a 1/8 of an inch up to there, to where this one runs out, and do a little back stitch there just to hold that, and then we're just going to ease into a 1/4 inch to come around the flap, and then back to 1/8 again where that piece joins in again. So we'll do that so that you can see what I'm doing. So as I said, just a 1/8. Make sure all your edges are sitting together nicely. And they're looking pretty good. So the 1/8 on this foot that I'm using here, it's the banana 1/4 inch foot, is just to the inside of that prong on the foot there. So I'm nearly, just make sure everything stays together. When you can feel where the piece going across is. When you get to the end there, just do a little back stitch just to make sure that's nice and strong, because that's the bit you're going to be going in and out of. And now we're on to the flap only, so I'm going to ease into a 1/4 inch, coming around that bend there, and go all the way along. And now just make sure this is still sitting right on this side, so that when you get to it, it's in the right place. You don't want to find you've suddenly sewn it in the wrong place. So we're coming around and we're easing back to the 1/8 as we come around that bend. And this just wants to move a little bit, so I'm just going to make sure that's sitting in there. It's looking good. Now I'm onto that piece now, so I just want to do a little back stitch. And then all the way down to the end, and this will also include the gap is on this side as well, but that will get stitched in as we stitch down here. Back stitch to hold that. Snip off any little threads that are hanging around, and we have made an amazing envelope pouch. How fun is that? So that just needs a little press, so everything will sit really nicely, and it's now ready for the most important things in life. Things like maybe, oh, imagine a big block of chocolate like that. That would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? So we now have 2 of these. We have a nice brightly coloured one, and we have one in not quite such bright colours. So I hope you've enjoyed that, making that envelope pouch, which I think would be fantastic, as I said, for like your electronic tablets and things like that, or maybe a book, or all sorts of things, including the chocolate. So that was idea number 6 with 2.5 inch strips, and I will see you again when I do idea number 7.